I still remember the exact moment people started listening to me. It happened in the same office where nobody used to look up when I spoke. Same gray walls. Same cheap coffee. Same people. But that morning, when I walked into the meeting room, the silence felt different. And the strange part was, nothing around me had changed yet. For most of my 20s, I thought being ignored meant people didn't like me. I worked at a small logistics company outside Chicago. Nothing glamorous. I sat in a corner cubicle near the printer that jammed every other day. My job was mostly spreadsheets, inventory reports, and fixing small mistakes before managers noticed them. I wasn't bad at my work. Actually, I was pretty good. But somehow, people treated me like background noise. You know those people in an office nobody remembers being there? That was me. I'd suggest ideas during meetings, and the conversation would move on like I never spoke. Then 10 minutes later, someone else would repeat the same thing and suddenly everybody loved it. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I started noticing patterns. People interrupted me constantly. They explained things I already knew. Sometimes they'd nod politely while checking their phones. I remember walking home one evening thinking, maybe this is just how life works. Some people naturally matter more. That thought stayed with me longer than I want to admit. My routine became painfully predictable. Wake up. Commute. Work quietly. Go home tired. Scroll my phone. Sleep. Every day felt emotionally flat. Not terrible. Just forgettable. And honestly, that was the worst part. Nobody was cruel to me. If they had been, maybe I could have reacted. Maybe anger would have given me energy. Instead, I got something quieter. Indifference. There's something psychologically exhausting about feeling invisible in rooms you enter every day. I started shrinking without realizing it. I spoke softer. I stopped sharing opinions. Even outside work, I avoided attention. At restaurants, I'd rehearse my order in my head so I wouldn't stumble. At stores, I used self-checkout to avoid conversations. It sounds small when I say it now. But tiny behaviors slowly shape how you see yourself. And eventually, they shape how others see you too. One Friday afternoon, my manager asked me to present a weekly report during a team meeting because someone else was absent. The second he asked, my stomach tightened. Not because the presentation was hard. Because I already knew what would happen. I'd talk. Nobody would care. The meeting room smelled like dry erase markers and burnt coffee. I remember staring at the screen while explaining shipment delays across 3 states. About halfway through, one of the senior employees interrupted me mid-sentence. "Can we just simplify this?" he said. A few people chuckled lightly. Not mean laughter. Worse. Dismissive laughter. I felt heat rise into my face. My brain completely froze for a second. Then something strange happened. I looked around the room, expecting embarrassment. But nobody even noticed how uncomfortable I was. The meeting just continued. That bothered me more than the interruption itself. On my drive home, I couldn't stop replaying it. Not because I was angry at him. Because I suddenly realized something uncomfortable. People had learned to ignore me because I had unknowingly taught them to. That thought sat in my mind all weekend. At first, I resisted it. I blamed personality types. Office politics. Confidence. Luck. But deep down, I knew there was truth in it. I had spent years communicating uncertainty without realizing it. Every sentence sounded like a question. Every opinion came wrapped in apology. I constantly waited for permission to exist in conversations. And human behavior reacts to signals faster than words. People don't always consciously decide who matters in a room. They feel it. That realization honestly disturbed me a little. Because if perception worked that way, then how much of my identity had been built from repeated assumptions? The next Monday, something happened that changed everything. Not dramatically. Quietly. I got to work early and sat alone in the break room drinking coffee. One of the delivery drivers came in, an older guy named Frank. He barely talked most days. He sat across from me and said, "You know why people don't hear you?" The question caught me off guard. I laughed awkwardly. Probably because I'm boring. He shook his head immediately. No. Because you talk like you're asking people if you're allowed to finish. I remember staring at him. Not offended. Just exposed. Then he said something I still think about years later. Most people decide your value before they evaluate your ideas. That sentence bothered me for days. Because it felt unfair. But also true. After that, I started observing people differently. Not their words. Their behavior. I noticed the confident employees paused before speaking instead of rushing. They didn't over-explain. They didn't apologize for small things. Even when they were wrong, they sounded certain. Meanwhile, I treated every interaction like a negotiation for acceptance. It became impossible to unsee. So I made a small decision. Not a dramatic life change. Just an experiment. For 1 month, I would stop trying to make people comfortable before expressing myself. That was it. I didn't suddenly become loud or arrogant. I simply stopped shrinking. The first few days felt unnatural. Painfully unnatural. In meetings, I forced myself to finish sentences without rushing. If someone interrupted me, I calmly continued instead of immediately backing down. The weirdest part? People reacted differently almost instantly. Not everyone. But enough to notice. One afternoon, a coworker asked for my opinion on a scheduling issue. Normally I would have softened my answer with phrases like, "I'm not sure, but maybe." Instead I just explained my perspective directly. He nodded and wrote it down. That tiny moment stayed with me the entire day. Because nothing about my intelligence had changed. Only my delivery. That realization created a strange mix of empowerment and sadness. I started replaying old memories differently. All those moments I believed people saw me as incapable. What if many of them simply responded to the version of myself I kept presenting? That thought hurt. But it also gave me control. Over the next few months, subtle things changed. Managers started including me in discussions earlier instead of last minute. Coworkers listened longer when I spoke. New employees assumed I was more experienced than I actually was. And the strange thing was, internally, I still felt like the same insecure person. That's what nobody tells you about confidence. Sometimes it begins externally before it feels real internally. One evening after work, I stopped at a grocery store near my apartment. While waiting in line, I noticed the cashier talking warmly to the customer ahead of me. Then it became my turn. Her energy changed instantly. Short responses. No eye contact. A year earlier, I would have taken it personally. But this time, I noticed something else. The customer before me stood differently. Spoke differently. Moved differently. Again, signals. Human psychology works quietly. We constantly react to emotional cues without realizing it. I walked back to my car thinking about how many invisible conversations happen beneath actual conversations. How often people mirror the energy we carry. And how dangerous assumptions become when repeated long enough. Around that time, I started reading more about perception, self-image, and behavioral psychology. Not obsessively. Just curiosity. One idea kept appearing everywhere. People rarely see you more clearly than you see yourself. That line unsettled me because I realized how long I had viewed myself through rejection. Every ignored comment became proof I lacked value. Every awkward interaction became evidence I didn't belong. Over time, my brain built an identity around those moments. And then I unconsciously performed that identity every day. Looking back, I think many people live this way without noticing. They mistake repeated experiences for permanent truth. But sometimes experiences are shaped by expectations we silently carry into every room. About a year after that conversation with Frank, our company went through major restructuring. Several supervisors left unexpectedly. A temporary leadership position opened in operations. Normally, I wouldn't have even considered applying. People like me didn't apply for roles like that. At least that's what I used to believe. I remember sitting at my desk staring at the application form for nearly 20 minutes. My mind kept producing old narratives. You're not leadership material. Nobody takes you seriously. You'll embarrass yourself. Then another thought appeared. Maybe those thoughts were never facts to begin with. Just rehearsed assumptions. So I applied. The interview itself wasn't extraordinary. No movie moment. No inspiring speech. But for the first time in my life, I answered questions without trying to sound harmless. I spoke clearly. Slowly. Directly. And a week later, I got the position. Temporary at first. Then permanent. What surprised me most wasn't the promotion. It was how people's behavior changed afterward. Coworkers who barely acknowledged me suddenly wanted my input. People laughed more at my jokes. Managers trusted my decisions faster. Part of me enjoyed it. Another part felt uncomfortable. Because I knew something they didn't. I was still the same person they ignored before. That realization changed how I viewed human behavior forever. People often believe they're reacting objectively to others. But perception is deeply emotional. We respond to confidence, hesitation, posture, tone, certainty, energy. And most of the time, we don't even realize we're doing it. One night, long after everyone left the office, I sat alone looking out the window at the parking lot lights. I kept thinking about my old self. The version of me who believed invisibility was permanent. And honestly, I felt compassion for him. Because he wasn't weak. He was conditioned. Conditioned by repeated moments that slowly shaped his identity. I think that happens to more people than we realize. A bad relationship convinces someone they're difficult to love. A humiliating classroom moment convinces someone they're unintelligent. A few failures convince someone they're incapable. And eventually, they stop questioning those conclusions. They build entire personalities around them. That's the hidden danger of assumptions. Especially the ones we make about ourselves. The biggest shift in my life wasn't money or career success. It was realizing that confidence isn't always believing you're amazing. Sometimes it's simply refusing to treat yourself like an apology. There's a difference. And once I understood that, other people slowly responded differently too. Not because I became more important. Because I stopped communicating that I was unimportant. Even now, years later, I still catch myself slipping into old habits sometimes. Talking too fast. Over-explaining. Softening my opinions before anyone challenges them. But now I notice it. And awareness changes things. Recently, I ran into an old coworker from that office. We grabbed coffee and talked for a while. At one point he laughed and said, "You really changed over the years." You became confident. I smiled politely. But internally, I thought something different. Maybe I didn't become confident. Maybe I just stopped rehearsing invisibility. And honestly, I think a lot of people are living that same invisible rehearsal right now without knowing it. They walk into rooms already expecting dismissal. They speak while anticipating rejection. They interpret every neutral moment as proof they don't matter. Then life slowly reflects those expectations back at them. Not because they lack value, but because human perception is strangely responsive to the stories people silently carry about themselves. That realization still stays with me. Because sometimes the biggest change in a person's life isn't learning how to impress the world. It's learning how to stop convincing themselves they were never worth noticing in the first place. And if I learned anything from those years of being ignored, it's this. People listen differently when you finally believe you deserve to be heard.